Okay, so good evening. We'll continue the series. So last week we started the first chapter of the Rebbe's Maamar from Hatzvi-Bais, in which the Rebbe begins the Maamar with a summary of the Friedike Rebbe's Maamar of Tavshin Yud. The first chapter of that Maamar is actually 2 paragraphs, and we managed last week to get through the first paragraph. Today, we're going to continue with the second paragraph. And when we finish the second paragraph, we are going to go to the actual Maamar of the Friedike Rebbe. And we're going to review the Perek Yud Beis, which corresponds to this year. The reason I'm doing it like that is because in the Rebbe's Maamar, basically what the Rebbe does, he gives the overview up until that Perek, right? He leads into that Perek, and then he continues with explaining a more elaborate explanation that's connected to that Perek, which this year would be Perek Yud Beis. Okay. So let us just jump right into it. So this would be on page Yud, the second paragraph. So briefly, up until this point, in the Rebbe's synopsis, the Rebbe's review of the Friedike Rebbe's Maamar, so what are some of the main points? The Maamar begins with Basi Legani, Achoisi Kalo, HaKadosh Baruch Hu telling Knesset Yisrael that I am coming back to my garden. And this, we find out, is a reference to Matan Torah, when Hashem, his presence, came back to this world. As the Pasuk says, Vayeret Hashem al Har Sinai, Hashem descended down to Har Sinai, which is a reference to the fact that from that point on, we again have Hashem's presence in this world. But that was just the beginning of a process, because this time, as opposed to the original Gan, when Hashem created the world, and he created the world that in this world there is a presence of Hashem, that was by Hashem's doing. That's the way he decided to create the world. By Matan Torah, however, yes, initiated by Hashem, as I just mentioned, the pasuk Vayeret Hashem al Har Sinai, Hashem descended down to Har Sinai, but he gave us the Torah, he gave us mitzvahs, and the purpose of the Torah and the mitzvahs is to continue that process of bringing the presence of Hashem into this world. So he's handing it over to us, so to speak. And as is explained many times in Chassidus, that this is the basic idea, the basic nekuda of Lasis Le'Yizborach Dira B'Tachtaynu, right? This is another Medrash. The Medrash says that the ultimate purpose for the creation was so that Hashem have a dwelling place in this physical material world. Ultimately, as explained at great length in many maamarim and many sichos, this is accomplished when we here in this world, we do it. Because otherwise it is Hashem superimposing himself, so to speak, which is something obviously that he can do. He can be wherever he wants. But then it's not really a dira for him, right? It's like almost if you're renting a house, right, and your landlord decides to walk in, right? He has the key and he walks in. He's not welcome. Right? He can come in, but he's not necessarily welcome. So Hashem is the landlord, so to speak. Whatever. I just came up with that marshal right now, but and he can be where he wants, but he wants to be welcome. He wants to be invited. And this is the process of Torah mitzvahs. We are making this world a place that is welcoming to the Shechina. The Shechina should feel comfortable there. And this is a process. So it all begins with the mitzvah that Moshe Rabbeinu began with when he came down from the mountain, right? The day after Yom Kippur, he began the building of the Mishkan. So the Frierdiker Rebbe points out that if you look carefully at the details of the building of the Mishkan, this will give you an idea, right? It represents that avodah, the avodah of the Rebbe Tachtayim. And one of the key terms that are used is that since it was built from Atze Shitim, Shitim, says the Frierdiker Rebbe, is a reference to Shtus. And just as we are living in a world, this place where we're making a dwelling place for Hashem is a world that's dominated with all kinds of shtus, but that's shtus that's called lemata mitam v'das. That's shtus in the simple meaning of the word shtus, silliness, right? Doesn't it's not rational, not normal even, right? That's how you use the word shtus. So the way to balance that, to counter it, is the avodah of shtus de kedusha, by doing things in the realm of kedusha, but also not necessarily calculated, right? Hence the term shtus. But it's shtus and whatever. The Rebbe does, of course, doesn't go into every single detail that the Frierdiker Rebbe mentions. It's a long Maamar. It's 20 chapters, right? And in the Maamar of Hatzvi-Bais, the Rebbe is reviewing the first 10 chapters, right? That's actually 2 maamarim, because the first is 5 chapters. That was on Yud Shvat, and then, as I described last week, the second installment was for Yud Gimel Shvat, and that was another 5 chapters, right? This year, that corresponds to Yud Beis, is already the 2nd chapter of the 3rd installment. Okay, so the key idea is the shtus diktusha. This avodah that we do, right? This avodah that we do has to be in a manner of shtus. It cannot be completely, totally calculated, right? Because then you will have accomplished, but you will not have totally accomplished the ultimate objective, which is that it should be adira and adira everywhere. Doing an avodah that's a calculated avodah would be kind of like doing an avodah in a safe place, and you're avoiding the shtus of the world, right? But engaging in that, but then the dira is it's not a dira, it's not everywhere, right? It's in reserved places. And so that the dira should be ultimately everywhere, it has to deal with every element of this world. And because there is, again, this idea of the shtus in this world, it has to be counted with an avodah, with a service to Hashem of shtus, the ma'ilo mitam bedas, a shtus that goes beyond the purely calculated approach.
It's not the end of the world. The thing takes batteries.
Somebody needs to mute. Okay.
That last explanation you gave sounds like there's all the areas.
Can I mute you? Where's the button to mute you? I can't mute you. That's the advantage of being here in person. Go ahead. Okay, I pressed the right button. Okay. Anyway, so the Rebbe now, in his review of the Maamar Basi Legani, right? The Rebbe is now by the 2nd chapter. So the Rebbe already mentioned what the Frierdiker Rebbe had said in that Maamar, that this avodah is given over Bnei Yisrael, and the Frierdiker Rebbe references the fact that Bnei Yisrael are referred to as Tzivos Hashem. Okay, Tzivos Hashem, and then there's different interpretations. But one of those interpretations is that these are Tzivos, soldiers, legions, whatever, right? We are like soldiers, right? So the indication would be that this process, this avodah of continuing to bring Hashem's presence in this world, is a battle, right? And being that it's a battle, right, you have to tap into some very you have to tap into the proper energies, so to speak, right, in order to be successful in that battle. Okay, and that's where we come in now in the 2nd chapter of the first ice of the first. How do you say ice? What's an ice? Ice is the first. What? No, because it's 2 paragraphs. There's 2 paragraphs in the first ice. Okay, whatever. After the Frierdiker Rebbe finishes the two maamarim meaning the first 10 chapters of the original Maamar of Basi Legani, Moisif b'hahemshech levayer es hakoiches shenoistim ilmailo kidei lamali o lahashlim avedazu. So then the Frierdiker Rebbe goes on to say that what he already mentioned, that we are doing this as soldiers in an army, so to speak, right? So we're waging a battle. So he begins to speak more in detail what kind of koiches, what kind of capabilities have to be made available for the soldiers in order to fulfill this mission. So now we're coming to chapter 11, right? And in chapter 11, the idea that we're Teves Hashem. And now we're going to lean on the interpretation that it means, like I mentioned, we're soldiers. It has to do with a battle, with a war, really. As we find in the Medrash, because again, this is also mentioned in the Maamar of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that just as we are called Tzivos Hashem, right? The term tzvakos, and I'm saying tzvakos is because that very same term is also one of Hashem's names. Okay? Remember from last year, right? So there was that's what we were really focusing on, right? And what's interesting is that, and this is actually goes back to Maamar from the Alter Rebbe, that the Shem tzvakos, right? We don't find until the very end of Tanakh, the last of the Nevi'im, but whatever, that's a different discussion. That was for last year. But in any case, it's one of Hashem's names, right? So the Medrash says, with reference to this name of Hashem, that's accomplished through doing the avodah, the service of a sava, of an army, right? So this name, that's a parentheses, by the way. There's a lot there in the parentheses, but I'm not. It's referencing some of the things that we already learned last year. I'll just keep moving on. That's what you get to do when it's a parentheses. You can say it's a parentheses, so we'll just move. We're not going to. Right? Says the Medrash, when is Hashem referred to as tzvakos? When Hashem says, when I am waging battle, birashayim, against the wicked people. Ani nikra tzvakos, then I am called tzvakos. Hence, the connection to the idea of waging a battle. I know. So back to tzvakos, back to Tzivos Hashem, right? That we Bnei Yisrael are referred to as the soldiers in the army. Just like Hashem says that when I'm waging war, when I'm dealing with the Rishayim, that's when I am called tzvakos, meaning that I am waging a battle, right? Likewise, our avodah, durchgehend die Welt, al pi atera mitzvah, is v'lifo she'elam yisnahig al pi atera mitzvah, is hi'ba'ifin shel Maamar. How do we further this mission that began at Matan Torah of the Kiyam of Torah and Mitzvahs? It's about transforming the world, but transforming which is accomplished through milchama. K'maimer, like it says, this is a maimer from the Zohar. Nam apon charba leichel. Part of life is you need to sustain yourself, right? And that's not always easy, right? So it says, Nama, the bread is like it's on the edge of the knife, of the sword, right? Well, I say knife because because I use a knife for my sustenance. But so Nama apon charba leichel. So if you want to eat, the Nama, your bread, is going to come like you're on the edge of a sword, okay? Meaning that it's a difficult process.
Could you bring me the
truth? It's interesting. This from the Rebbe Rashab mentions from the Rebbe Marash. The Rebbe Marash actually used this as a directive to Chassidim that this is how you have to live your life. After you live your life, that you have to realize you're on the edge of a sword. You know, don't first of all, don't take things for granted, right? And understand that everything that you're doing in the process of acquiring your sustenance, right? You're going to have to deal with the world, right? And be that you're dealing with the world, you have to know that you're walking a very thin line, so to speak, right? So you should always remember you're out there in business, right? And you're dealing with people, and you're dealing with things that are not necessarily, in the realm of holiness, right? Bear in mind that you're walking on a thin edge, as they say.
Bread means also the actual food you're eating and other things.
Okay. Or when you sit down to meal, also this Maamar Chazal is referenced. You could either be gluttonous, or you could understand that 1 second. Have to be conscientious, and I have to be, mindful of what I'm doing. Right? It's not just doing something. It's you're on the edge of the sword, right? Always on the edge of the sword. So the Frierdiker Rebbe goes on to explain that in a milchama there are two objectives. One objective, two alternative objectives, I could say. One objective is lishlal shlal lavuz bas. It's in order to acquire wealth. Okay, and a king has lots of responsibility. He's responsible for the people over whom he's a king, right? And part of that could be that he needs to conquer lands, right? Got to go where the oil fields are, right? Because we need a lot of energy. So that's one of the purposes for waging a battle. Hatzvi-Bais, but then there's something deeper. There are times that the king will wage a war because he wants, and he's driven, he's motivated by nitzachim. And this is a key word that comes up in the Maamar, right? Especially last year, it was all about nitzachim. The melech needs to prevail and be victorious. It's something that's very deep, as the Frierdiker Rebbe, because the midah of nitzachim goes very, very deep. And how do we know this? Because you see that when a person is driven by nitzachim, there's nothing. Sorry, on page Yud, about halfway down the second paragraph. So the nitzachim, you see that when a person is motivated by nitzachim, right? Then there's nothing can stop him. Meaning that it's very deeply rooted. Yeah, let's not forget we're talking here metaphorically. We're talking about a king, right? But one of the things that we can notice is that sometimes a melech will be so driven by his need to be victorious, right? That he'll go to nothing will stop him, right? As we'll soon see when it comes to the right. And again, we're using this as a mashal, right? But that is the midah that the Frierdiker Rebbe says is necessary in order to wage this battle, the battle of transforming the world and making it a Mokeh Madira Lo Yisbarach, a dwelling place for Hashem, bringing the Shechina into every single corner of this world, every element of this world, etc., etc. When you're waging a battle in order to acquire wealth, right? So that's a calculated thing. That's tam v'das. It's calculated. So being that it's a calculated objective, so then you're also going to take into account how much do I need to invest into it. I'm not going to invest more than what I'm going to achieve by this battle, right? How many lives will it cost? How much energy, how much, etc., etc. Because it's a calculated thing. Being that it's calculated, the resources that are necessary are also going to be calculated. But when we speak about Al-Mulchama, the Rebbe is referring to this as the Ikerin in Hamulcham, right? Because this is what real wars are to offer, right? It's about nitzachin, conquering, being victorious. Well, it begins with the ratzin. We'll soon see. It begins with the Ratzin, but because the Ratzin is embedded so deeply in the person, right? So that's where the Netzachin is coming to fulfill. The Ratzin has to also be something that's very deeply embedded within the king, and in our case, within those. Whoa. Okay. But, yeah, okay. Yeah, but it's something that in order for us to properly, I mean, that's what we're learning the Maamar. The Maamar is teaching us how we're going to proceed with this process of making a diraleis baruch v'tachlim. Okay, so we have to understand that we have to recognize first that this is something that we have to conquer. Okay, and the main point, as we'll soon see, is that Hashem gives us the koiches for this. Okay. Now, we're talking about Ratzin, as you just pointed out, right? One of the things you know about the Ratzin is that's one of the koiches that are actually reflecting the essence of the person, right? The lower koiches, right? Beginning from Chachma, Bin, etc., right? These are all different manifestations of the person's character, etc., right? But behind all of it has to be a Ratzin. Right? Because the Ratzin is what is actually, I mean, a person can engage in any one of these characteristics, right? But if he doesn't have a Ratzin, he'll do it without any desire, right? Then it'll be lacking, right? It's the Ratzin that's driving. Why? Because the Ratzin is what the Kayach that is a lot deeper, right, to the essence of the person.
Isn't also the Ratzin that even brings about the Hatzvi-Bais? It's not like, why would Hatzvi-Bais even be there if there's no Ratzin? Right.
Well, I mean, there could be a situation where the person is asked to engage, let's say in Kollel, right? But there's no Ratzin. So if you're trying to encourage that person and you see that there's no Ratzin, you're going to probably give up, right? You get, hey, listen, you don't really want to do this, they'll do it. Halfway.
I'm doing it because you told me to do it. That's my Ratzin.
Now it could be that very very well may be. Now, if the relationship is such that you want to please the person who's asking you, there you have a Ratzin, and then the success will be, of course, much.
But what I'm saying, I'm thinking like there won't even be a Hatzvi-Bais without a Ratzin. You need the Ratzin even just to get to stage one.
Okay. Yeah. Good. That's why Ratzin is talking at the beginning of all the everything. Right. Okay. So since it all begins with the Ratzin of the Melech to have this Nitzachim, right? There's no cheshbonis, there's no calculation there. Right? There doesn't have to be any reason to explain why he's doing what he's doing and why he's going to the lengths that he goes to, right? So when we are here, right, and we are called again, it's voice. We are like a soldier, part of an army that its goal is the nitzachim. So our avodah has to reflect that nitzachim. There has to be, the soldiers have to be completely 100% in tune with we are doing what we are doing in order to bring about the nitzachim. Going back to what the Rabbi mentions very early on in the Maamar, the idea of countering the shtus of the opposite of kedusha with the shtus of kedusha, which is l'mayla b'tam b'das. Again, the term used that it is beyond reason. Okay, now here comes the main point, the point that leads into Perik Yud-Bais. In order for this Nitzachim to happen, right? So we mentioned just briefly before that the king is, well, maybe it wasn't mentioned yet in the Rebbe's Maamar. Okay, Bishvil zeh, in order for this Nitzachim to happen, right? Okay, so this is language basically that's addressing the metaphor of the king, right? And the king has treasures, and these treasures are so special that they've been hidden away for generations and generations, and nobody would dare tap into these oitzers, these resources. Okay, these treasures. But when it comes to Nitzachim, nothing stops, right? Nothing will stop the Melech.
So these are motivational methods for the Jews to get.
The motivation is the Nitzachim. The tools to fulfill that motivation, okay, is the interest that are available.
But the king wants, but he needs the soldiers to boil him
But
up
there's,
and carry it out.
well, you're right. Well, that's the point. I understand. Yeah, of course. But that was pointed out before, because when we made the correlation between the fact that Hashem is called Tzvakos, right, and we are called Tzittas Hashem, right. So just like it's Hashem who has an objective, right, and this objective is something to be accomplished through Nitzachim, conquering, right. Likewise, that has to reflect in the Tzivos Hashem, in the soldiers. But you still need the Melech. You know why you need the Melech? The soldiers are ready to fulfill what the king wants, but we need the resources to do it. And because the king is so driven, right? He's so driven that he's willing to be mevazvez. Nothing is untouchable when it comes to fulfilling this objective.
In order to get us in that same mindset.
It's the Maamar is what's supposed to be getting you in that mindset. This Maamar is getting us into that mindset. It's not the king getting it. It's not. Yeah. Okay. So again, the Maamar is using the metaphor of a king waging a battle with soldiers, etc., right? Okay, so let's not get also stuck in the metaphor. Let's apply it, right? There's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's the Eibishter. The Eibishter wants a dir b'tachtonim, right? It's an issue that's negeya be'etzem. It's something that touches the very essence, so to speak. And again, we're not going to elaborate on that because that's been elaborated over and over in maamarim and sichas, etc., that this is something coming from the essence of Hashem, right? And we who are the soldiers again, right, who are going to accomplish this, right, have to be in tune with that drive, with that nitzachim of the Eibishter, right? Okay, but here's the main point for now. The main point for now is that in order for, just like in the metaphor, in order for the soldiers to accomplish it, the king has to make available to them the resources, right? And likewise, in the Nimshal, in reference to our avodah of making a deal, the Eibishter is providing for us from the deepest treasures. Okay, that's the point now where we're at in the Friedrich of this matter. So he's going to tap into those treasures that have been completely hidden, perhaps even for generations, right? He gives it over to the officers, and then the officers make it available to the soldiers. It's interesting. It just entered my mind just now that, you know, they were so focusing on the metaphor, right? And in the mashal, the king is giving it over to the soldiers, right? But look how the Rebbe put in that he's giving it over to the Pekidei HaChayil. First, he gives it over to the officers, and then the officers. So I just now, just the thought just went into my head that indeed, right, in order for us to accomplish this mission, right, there have to be the Pekidei HaChayil. And the Pekidei HaChayil are actually the means to which we get these koiches. So if you want to have the koiches in order to accomplish the dir b'tachtonim, right? And the Eibishter is giving you from the oiches, is giving you the koyach. How's it going to come to you? It's going to come through the Pekidei HaChayil, which is, from my understanding, this would be by our kashus to the Rebbe, right? The Rebbe would perhaps be the Pekidei HaChayil that we're referring to over here. Hashem is giving him those koiches, and through our kashus to the Rebbe, those koiches then are able to become utilized by us. I don't know. To me, it seems like that's Pashut Pshat over here. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It has to be. That's the preferred way. It's the preferred way. But to say that it cannot happen otherwise, there's sometimes, let's say, and let's go back to the marshal. Let's say the king, where's the officer, whatever. And he sees a soldier and he says, "Listen, and he goes directly to the soldier." I would imagine that perhaps could be manifested, that idea, in a case where you have a ish pashat, right? It was not necessarily kosher to Rebbe because he doesn't know, he didn't grow up, right? Right? And where did he get the koyach to have Mesiras Nefesh? So the preferred way is, like, for example, the Chassidim in Russia, right, who had Mesiras Nefesh for Yiddishkeit. Where did they get that Mesiras Nefesh for Yiddishkeit? Because they were Chassidim of the Frierdiker Rebbe. There's no question about it. It was the Frierdiker Rebbe that passed on to them that capacity that they should be able to have the Mesiras Nefesh that they had. I mean, that's clear. There's no question about it. But that does not preclude the fact that you could be a Yid is connected to the Eibishter. And every Yid is part of this process of making a dir with Achayim. So when you see an example of a Yid having Mesiras Nefesh, that would be that Yid somehow he didn't wait for he didn't know that he has to go to the Pekidi Amelech. and somehow he demonstrated that he was able to conquer the situation with Mesiras Nefesh. Whatever, just
I would say it would be easier to argue that the Pekida is plural, so it doesn't mean just Rebbe, which is singular, so it would improve the infrastructure as well in the study of Alafim,
I don't have a word. I
would pass through the Pekida.
I don't have a problem. To me, his kashrus to the Rebbe means that your hiskashis to the Rebbe and getting chayus and koiches could be by learning a maamar from the Alter Rebbe too. Okay, and to me that there's no chilik if you're getting a chayus and you're learning a maamar from the Rebbe's maamarim, right? Or if you're getting the fact that I am getting chayus from a maamar is because I'm a chassid of the Rebbe, because I'm a kusha to the Rebbe. So it doesn't matter which maamar.
Yeah. Storehouse takes it out and gives it to the Rebbe, would give out dollars. We would have it stacked by one person, and he would give it to other people. It's still the Rebbe's dollars.
Okay, yes, absolutely. Okay, so let's move on. Anyway, so the Malach is prepared to tap into these treasures and to give them to the soldiers, to just spread them out to the soldiers, whoever needs it, in order to fulfill this mission. Says the Rebbe, this right now already the Rebbe is in Perik Yud Aleph. This Perik Yud Aleph, says the Rebbe, this is what leads into what we are going to now focus on in Perik Yud Bais. So this is our Hakdama. This is our preface to Perik Yud Bais, right? That Perik Yud Bais, we spoke about the idea that the Melech is going to tap into these treasures and make them available to the soldiers in order that they can fulfill the mission, right? Now the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to focus on what those koiches are. Okay? In other words, what is that oitzer? What's the oitzer? So now in Perik Yud Beis, he's now going to explain what are these koiches that are given to every yid from above, from the Melech, from the king. So just to use the general term, these are the hidden treasures. But the kavanah is not that they remain hidden, but you have to go take advantage of these koiches. So every yid is being given these very, very special koiches, these capabilities, right? But the fact that every yid has that potential is not enough. You have to tap into it. So you have to open up, activate it, tap into it, and open them up. And it's interesting. So it has to be open. First of all, it has to be opened by Hashem, right? And then it has to be given to those who are meant to receive it.
Who's opening it up?
Ultimately, it's really Hashem. The fact that we have that capacity is because it was given to us by Hashem. At the same time, We have to recognize it.
Language over here is like it was pre-open before.
And the way it's given, by the way, is that it should be a tzorcha hatayv lonu tiftach. Here, we're using a lashon that's not from a pasuk, it's not from Tanakh, it's not from Chazal, it's from the Python that made the piyutim, right, of the slichas of Erev Rosh Hashanah. If you look in the footnote, it does. Well, I guess I was looking different footnotes, but that's where it's from. It's from the piyut of Erev Rosh Hashanah, and also repeated also in the Ilah. Okay, in Ilah and also in Ishad Rabbah. I mean, it's mostly recognized from the piyutim of Ishad Rabbah because it ends. That's the bold letters in between the right. What's in this nusach? What's hiding here in this nusach? It's your oitzer, it's your treasures. But they're good for us. So tiftach, open them up for us. And here we're focusing on the words hatayv lanu, that these oitzers that are given to them, it's not enough that they're just given and made available. You have to also appreciate and recognize that they are good. They are good for you. Especially in conjunction with the fact that they are coming from such a deep and hidden place.
The motivation that we're given is, let's say this, and it's a placer, but we have to understand what we're being given.
Okay, so this is the Rebbe's Maamar from Tafshin Hatzvi-Bais, where up until this point, the first oist of the Maamar, printed in 2 chapters, right, is basically the Rebbe leading us into Perek Yud Beis. So let's learn the first sentence, the first line of Ois Beis, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go to the actual Perek Yud Beis of the original Basi Legani of the Friedrich Rebbe. Okay, so Mam Shech Levayer, and here the Rebbe is saying the Maamar, and the Maamar the Rebbe is saying, and the Friedrich Rebbe goes on to explain this if Yud Beis in chapter 12, Hashayich Lishnas Hayilula Hayud Beis, which is connected to the year, the 12th anniversary, so to speak, of the passing of the Friedrich Rebbe. Here the Friedrich Rebbe is going to go and focus on this Eitzer. After the Friedrich Rebbe in the previous chapter tells us about the koiches that are given from this Eitzer, right? In order for us to accomplish the mission of the Melech, motivated by the midas anitzachim, so to speak, of the Melech, which is also reflected in the soldiers. Okay, so we're going to now stop the Maamar Tafshin Hatzvi-Bais, and we're going to turn back, and we're going to go to the beginning here of the pamphlet, which is the actual Maamar, chapter 12, the Maamar of the Friedrich Rebbe. Okay, so just a little warning before. It's very Kabbalistic, okay, because the whole chapter Yud Beis is based on something in Tikkunei Zohar, in a reference to Or Ein Sof. Or Ein Sof is the Kabbalistic term that's used in reference to Hashem, okay? And the Tikkunei Zohar makes a statement about this Or Ein Sof, right? The statement is that this Or Ein Sof is the Ma'ila Adei Ketz, it's infinite. And the way it describes the infinite is that it could go higher and higher infinitely, but also Lamata Mata Din Tachlis, it could go down below also infinitely. Okay. What we have to bear in mind, right, is that the Friedrich Rebbe in this Ois is going to focus on the second half of that description of the Or Ein Sof. The infinite light, the term used to describe Hashem, goes even lamato mato adin tachlis. Nothing could stop it. It can go everywhere, absolutely everywhere, to the low, even to the lowest places. Okay.
Which page are you going to now?
I went back to page Zion. Okay. So interestingly, although this is the focus, and again, as we'll soon see, the Maamar of the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to take a little adjusting our brains over here, because it's, like I said, it's very Kabbalistic in a sense. It's all based on Kabbalistic terms, right? And especially when the term that's we're really focusing on is on the infinite, okay? That literally is through the whole chapter, this concept of infinite, which is why the best person to be giving the shiur would have been Tzvi Yehuda Sachs, right? Because he was the master on the concept of infinite, both in mathematics and how he applied it to Chassidus. Which Baruch Hashem, I had discussed to be a very close friend of his, and I would hear his shiurim and his lectures on this topic. Although at the time, I have to confess, I probably didn't understand the word that he was saying. But in any case,
Who was this issue with Rabbi Ari?
it's Tzvi Yehuda Sachs. Okay, so yeah, do you remember him? Yeah, you were around when he was. Yeah. Okay, whatever. Okay, but in any case, the focus here is going to be on the infinite as it's referring to the mata in tachlis. Okay. But ultimately, that's not the point that the Frierdiker Rebbe wants to make. He's going to speak about that element of the infinite, as far as the Ein Sof, to make the contrast. But that's not where the Eitzer is coming from. The Eitzer is coming from the infinite. But for that, we're going to have to wait for next year. Because this year, the focus is complete. I mean, in the Rebbe's Maamar already, I don't think the Rebbe's not going to be Hatzvi-Bais. He didn't patiently say we'll have to wait for next year. But that's yeah, you can jump ahead. But in the Ois Yud Beis is going to be Be'ikr. Starts with quoting this Maamar from the Tekuni Zohar, which is one of the Sifrei Zohar. Also, the originates from the Rabbi. But it's going to be mostly focusing on the mata. What does that mean? The infinite, the mata the intax. Okay? And with the purpose of then contrasting the Eitzer, from which we get the koyach, right? To bring about the nitzachin of this milchama, right? Is the Eitzer is going to be from the Maila Adinkas. Okay? But this is what we're learning now, so let's jump into it. Okay? To understand this Eitzer Lamailom, what does this mean? This treasure that Hashem has above. Hine Isa, we find B'tikuni Zohar. Orin Sof Lamaila Adin Ketz, Ulamata Adin Tachlis. This Orin Sof, we're calling Hashem Or. Now, let me I'm going to back up a little bit over here. I want to share with you something that I actually heard from Rabbi Khan, who was my teacher when I was too young to have deserved to be a student, but Baruch Hashem, it was still at a time when he was teaching us young kids as well. Okay, so we were learning the Maamar from Derech Mitzvah. Derech Mitzvah was written by the Tzemach Tzedek, and it's basically a biur according to Chassidus, explanation according to Chassidus on the various mitzvahs in the Torah. Okay, so this particular Maamar or essay, whatever you want to call it, and the reason why I'm saying that is because last week we spoke about what a Maamar is, right? And it turns out that a Maamar is sometimes, if it's written, right, and this was written by the Tzemach Tzedek, and if I'm not mistaken, I think parts of Sheish Mitzvah Satfilo were written by the Tzemach Tzedek before he even assumed the Nesius. He was young, right? And yet we do refer to it as Maamar, the maamarim of Deren. There is a distinction, but it's still a Maamar. Okay. But I what's it called? What's the word? I already said last week that we don't really know exactly what term to use to explain what a Maamar is, right? It's Chassidus, but what does that mean? Chassidus is not always given over in the form of a Maamar, right? So again, you know what I didn't mention last week? What?
Friedrich Rebbe paid to sit on Prince Wilhelm's.
You're right.
Right of mine?
No, that's right. Okay, so maamarim were also written. Derech Losech was written, and the Tzemach Tzedek was not even yet, it wasn't yet considered as to be the Rebbe at the time, right? It was still during the lifetime of the Mitzvah Rebbe, maybe even before, right? So in that maamar of Sheirish Mitzvah Satfila, the Tzemach Tzedek makes a very important point. It says, when we learn Kabbalah, right, we learn about Teres Hanistar, we learn about the deeper realities, the spiritual realities, right? Which is what Teres HaKabbalah is about. It's speaking about the Lakos, speaking about godliness, and the relationship of godliness with creation, right? So we're talking about deeper realms in very, very great detail. Great detail. Says the Tzemach Tzedek that when learning Teres HaKabbalah, there has to be a zihirus. You have to be extremely, extremely cautious. Why do you have to be cautious? Because Kabbalah, Zohar, Sefer HaZohar, when speaking about Elokus, speaking about godliness, it speaks about it in very metaphoric terms, or if you would like, anthropomorphism. Exactly. So we're using human qualities to describe godliness. Okay, it has its issues amongst the philosophers, etc., but that's the fact. The fact is that Zohar was speaking about the Elokus, but it's speaking about it in human terms. Okay, there are no other terms that we can use, right? Hence, says the Tzemach Tzedek, you have to be very careful. The lashon of the Tzemach Tzedek is lahavshit hadvarim migash b'yusar. Even though you're reading the words, and the words are human terms, you have to be mavshit. You have to understand that the concept behind these words, you have to separate it from how it's actually being presented, right? Lahavshit. In other words, you have to see beyond the term. You have to see what's the concept, the transcendent concept, the abstract concept that these words are being used to reference, okay? Because if you don't know that before you go into it, you can get a very, very distorted view of Elokus. So hence, you could have a guy who has access to these, to the Zohar, or not even the Zohar, to Tanakh, right? And he'll make a picture of a Malach. And what's he going to do when he makes a picture of a Malach? He's going to draw it with wings, right? Well, yeah, of course. Those are terms that are used, not in Zohar. That's from Tanakh, right? The Ifanim and all these, right? Why? Because he wasn't Mavshit Bigash B'Yusan. He didn't understand. We're not talking about wings, right? We're talking about some deeper concept. And any student of Chassidus, and you learn Tanya, right? You get that right away. Because the Alter Rebbe goes straight, to what the idea of the Godfin. What's the idea? It's Avo, it's Yira, right? And that's why our Avodah cannot be with just Avo, just Yira, because just like a bird cannot fly with one wing, needs two wings. Likewise, in our Avodah we need. Okay, so this we know from learning Chassidus. So remember when we were learning this, Rabbi Yael, he said, there's a misconception. People think that Teres HaChasidus is a biur on Teres HaKabbalah, right? He says, really, it's just the opposite. He said, Kabbalah is a biur on Chassidus. In Chassidus, though, when you're learning about these ideas in Chassidus, right, the language that was chosen was dafke, specifically a language where the language is speaking to the abstract. We have, since a human being is capable of thinking in the abstract, right? Perhaps this is what's unique about a human being. So we have already words in our language that the words that we use are indicating that we're dealing with something conceptual rather than something actually, physical. Okay. So Chassidus actually tries to shy away, so to speak, from using the terminology of Kabbalah, right? So we speak about the spheres and atzilus, right? Now, it's true in the Kabbalah, what's the spheres of atzilus, the lower spheres? It's called ze'er anpin, little faces, right? So if you're an artist, you're going to draw a spheres, you can make little faces or whatever. It's going to be a complete, total, distortion of what it really means, right? when we speak about this Firis, we speak about Chagas, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes. Now, by calling it Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, right away, already these are terms that are the terms that actually the Zohar also uses those terms, right? But more often in Zohar, it's the Ze'er Anpin. In Chassidus, we'll refer to the Ze'er Anpin, but you'll notice almost always in Chassidus, it's not fully written out. It's Zoh, right? Zoh is the Ze'er Anpin. When you're learning Chassidus, I'll bet you there are Peli Bachim that don't even know what Zoh stands for. Zoh is the Midah, so from Chassid to Malchus, right? Or Chassid to Yisod, however you want to look at it, right? Chaim, you're the closest to having been a Bacher. When you learn the minor and you say, Zoh, Mamshich, Zoh in Malchus, right? When you were saying Zoh, what were you thinking in your head right away? Little face, you were thinking the Midas that are right from the beginning. Okay? So my maamarim, I don't know if this is done by Kavanah, but in any case, she said, because Chassidus is speaking in the abstract, right? When you give a mashal, right? And it's an anthropomorphic mashal, right? It's a metaphor. That mashal is to be a hezber, that's to explain the abstract. You want to understand the abstract? Well, let's look at it in this mashal and then go back to what's the concept behind this mashal. She says, because Chassidus uses hafshata dike lashon, it uses abstract language, right? So if anything, Teves HaKabbalah, the actual Zohar, it would be a beer, it's a mashal for what you're learning in Chassidus. So little faces is a mashal for the 6 midas from Chesed to Yisod, right? Whatever, I'll upon him. So this is what I remember. I remember from sitting and learning with Rabbi. They said that if anything, Chassidus is there is an exception, and this is an exception that the Frierdiker Rebbe addresses, the Rebbe Rashab addresses it. When it comes to referring to Hashem, right? What's the term that's used in Kabbalah? The Or Ein Sof. He is the infinite light. That might not fit into the category of anthropomorphism because it's not a human trait necessarily, but it's a physical trait, right? And yet, in Chassidus, the preferred term, perhaps you can say borrowed from Kabbalah, when speaking about Hashem, is Or Ein Sof, the infinite light. The Frierdiker Rebbe poses a direct question. He says, a better term, if you want to stick with abstract terminology, Hashem should be referred to as maybe the Shefa Ein Sof. What is Shefa? Shefa means influence. Influence is a much more abstract term than light. Light is something physical, right? And yet, in the maamarim, the Frierdiker Rebbe, also, that's actually based on maamar from the Rebbe Rashab. Why did Chassidus choose Dafke to stick with the metaphorical expression, referencing Hashem himself, right, as the Or Ein Sof? Okay, so basically, it's because Or has so many interesting characteristics that if you're going to use a word, this is the perfect word. Because of observable characteristics that light has. Okay. I'm looking at the clock and I'm realizing that we're not going to learn much of this ice days today. That was on the schedule, but Zolshan Zayin. Let it be what it is. But in any case, so light has very, very interesting qualities, right? And one of them, or maybe two of them, actually comes up in this ice of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Because of those qualities, it is the chosen term in Teres Chassidus that actually tries to stick with abstract language. And here, that is the favorite term when talking about the English. Okay. So yeah. Well, mashpia is a wonderful term, but again, because the one thing that I will mention is that, I mean, this, I don't think it says this actually in the Maamar, but it's something that I myself notice that the term light, when it's used, even outside of the context of Chassidus, even outside of the context of Torah or even Kedusha, and across multiple languages, people immediately connect with something abstract. The term light, right? Oh, you've enlightened me. What does that mean? That you turned on the light in the room? You shined a flashlight? That's not what enlightened means, right? And on and on. The term light, although it's a physical thing, right? But at the same time, in language, the connotation is that you're talking about something conceptual. Right. You're right. Well, that's one. Yeah, that's one of the things. But again, I just thought of one of light, enlighten or whatever. It's or wow, what an illuminating thought. Or you come up with some other examples maybe. But light again, a light, and I believe that this is probably across cultures, across languages. Light. People use the term light, and they're more often using it in the abstract rather than referring to something physical. Okay. Because we only have a few minutes and we're not really going to do much justice to this parak over here. So let me just use these few minutes to go through some of the qualities that Chassidus points out about physical light, which is why it became the preferred term when referring to Hashem. Or Ein Sof. Okay? We stay away from Se'er Anpin and Arich Anpin and etc. etc. I mean, it comes up obviously, but it's not the general terminology in Chassidus, right? But Or Ein Sof is basic when it comes to referring to Hashem. Okay, so Atzvusei Mahusai is because of the maamarim that make that distinction between Or Ein Sof, right, and Atzvus Mahus, right? Okay, because there is a distinction. But without Chassidus explaining to us, I don't know that it was even recognized that there's a distinction. Or Ein Sof is a reference to Hashem. The distinction between Or Ein Sof and Atzvus Mahus is, I believe, pretty unique to Teres Chassidus Chabad. I don't know. Where do you find? You find in the Arizal that there's a distinction between the Or Ein Sof and Atzvus Mahus. Is the term Atzvus Mahus used even? I don't know. Okay, whatever. But the bottom line is that yes, of course, when you start learning into deeper maamarim, right? So you're going to learn at great length and great detail, not only the distinction between the Or Ein Sof and the Atzvus Mahus, but in the Or Ein Sof, the Pnimis Yar, the Chetzain Yisar, and etc. Okay. But I'm racing the clock now, so I just want to put out so we can do something with the Shleibus that. Or one of the things that you see about Or, and this is the one that the Rabbi is going to actually reference further on in this place when we get to it in Eretz Hashem, is that Or is a reflection. And also, it doesn't have any existence of its own. Okay? Now, let me give you the perfect way to understand what I just said. When you look in a mirror, right? What are you seeing in that mirror? You're actually seeing yourself, right? And you're seeing every detail of yourself. There's no shinui unless there's a distortion in the mirror. But if it's a good mirror, straight, shiny mirror, right, you're going to see exactly what's standing opposite the mirror. Why are you seeing it? Because the light that's reflecting off of you into the mirror, right? Are you in the mirror? You see exactly what's standing opposite the mirror. That's called Or Me'ein HaMa'or. The Or is a perfect reflection of its source. Okay, that's physical light. Physical light. Something we notice, a characteristic about physical light. Wow, that's beautiful. That's a great idea. Conceptually, I want to use that for Elikus. Because when I speak about the Or Ein Sof, right? Although I'm speaking, when you get into the deeper elaboration, that it's not the Atzvus Mahus, right? But guess what? It's a perfect reflection of the Atzvus Mahus, which is why it's infinite. Perfect reflection. Being that it's such a perfect reflection, that also includes the fact that it has nothing of its own. It has nothing of its own other than the reflection of its source. Okay? So those two ideas, those two nikudis of Or is two of the reasons, amongst others, why this term became the favorite term, not just in Teves HaKabbalah, but also in Teves HaChassidus, with the explanation of Rabbi Khan that Chassidus prefers abstract lashon rather than metaphorical lashon, right? And yet this is the lashon. So in Mitzvah Hashem, I guess next week we will move on with Eis Yud Beis, and we will delve a little bit deeper into what does it mean that this reflection, this infinite reflection of Hashem, right? And I'm using the word reflection, right? Is infinite and in all directions, up and down. So I just want to also mention that this shiur is dedicated for Refuah Shleima for the following: Anash Yosef Yitzchok ben Simo Chasya, Baruch Mendel ben Bela, Eliyahu Leib ben Esther Itke, and Moshe Yehuda ben Golda, Refuah Shleima Ukreva Meyad. Good night. Thank you very much. And Eretz Hashem, we will get together again next week, Wednesday night.